Greetings and welcome to the show, World War II Books Where to Start. I'm your host, Bull Halsey. Today we're going to do a bit of a grab bag, just two titles, but we'll go into detail on them. One from the European theater and one from the Pacific. Taking place in that middle portion of the war, 43 to 44, that kind of gets forgotten about. So we'll kick it off with Black Thursday by Martin Caidin from 1960. So it's a golden oldie. But look at this paperback. This is a Dell edition paperback, and it's slightly smaller than normal size paperbacks. Seen quite a bit of wear and tear, obviously. I picked it up when I was a kid. I'm talking like 10, 12 years old. So I've had it since then, so 40 years later, it is still kicking pretty strong. And note the blue edging on the pages, kind of odd. But really sets this book apart. And the reason I'm going into this is because of the line drawings by a certain Fred Wolf. Go back for the glare there. Just black and white etchings throughout the book, which I think are fantastic and give a lot of flavor when you don't have photographs. This is definitely showing the time period it was made in. I love it. And then we have a drawing of the bomber box formation for strategic bombing with B-17s and B-24s in Europe. And then, again, just the bombs dropping from chapter to chapter. Pretty cool stuff. That's why I've kept this edition all these years. It's just a really cool piece. I've never had any other paperback like it, and I've never found another one. I guess if I hunt around on the internet these days long enough, I could probably find some more Dell editions like this. I would love to have them. But I just thought I'd bring that up. And as a thing to publishers today, this is pretty cool. If you brought this back as retro stuff, I think people would snap it up. Black Thursday is going to be about the Schweinfurt raid. In October 43, there were several raids, but this was the big famous one to try to knock out the ball-bearing industry of Germany's military machine. And it was considered like a panacea target. If we knock out this one industry that's concentrated in this one city, we could get Germany to collapse and agree to surrender within 6 months. Good idea. This was in the infancy of strategic bombing as the Air Force trying to find its feet and find its way with its missions in Europe and to find itself as an independent service branch of the service. Good idea on paper. Making it happen in reality was another issue altogether. And Black Thursday is going to take this raid on October 14th, I think it was, 1943, and walk you through it step by step. Martin Caidin was a great aviation writer. Did some novels too. Very dedicated to the aviation community. So he's well regarded and well liked. And several books, and I've read a few of them. He's just got the touch. He's really good. He's got the touch. Might be a little bit over the top dramatic at times, but that was kind of the style back then, maybe. So you might be wading into some melodrama here and there at points, but not too much. It's not going to distract you too much. I love this one. So he's going to go through the technicalities of forming up a bomber formation and what goes into getting a mission off the ground with the awful weather in England, and the capabilities of B-17, the crewmen, the ground crew, the commanders, the planning of the mission, the staff, the briefings before the mission, and what the men go through to get themselves mentally prepped and to carry out what is essentially just a terrifying heart-in-your-mouth all-the-time mission. It could be 8 to 10 hours because these things are lumbering beasts in the sky, prop-driven. They are not fast by any means, carrying several tons of bombs, plus all the ordnance and the fuel. So they are waiting to just blow up like firecrackers in the sky, and that's what the German fighter defense does to them. This was an all-out effort this day by the German fighter defense. They threw up everything they had, including night fighter squadrons, and their attempt to prove that they could defend the Reich in daytime raids and save the populace. This was a big concern to the Germans, especially at the summer bombing of Hamburg, which I've described in another video. They killed 40,000 people in 1 week. There was a big concern about public panic and possibly riots against the regime, so they really want to demonstrate to the public that they can do this, can defend the Reich. This is a showpiece effort right here. So several hundred German fighters matched up against unescorted formation of several hundred B-17s. The Liberator group that was included in this strike mission had to turn back because of being unable to form up in the bad weather over England. So it's just strictly fortresses as far as I can remember. The escort fighters for the Americans could only go up to about the German border because the P-47s of this era had very short legs. There were later developments of the P-47 that had much longer endurance over the Pacific. But in 43, they are thirsty machines and very powerful, but they just don't have the long legs to go all the way and back, like the Mustang would a few months later. So you got a perfect recipe here for a potential disaster. And it just about came to that. The startling figure is 60 bombers shot down and dozens more damaged beyond repair when they do return to England. But it should be noted that despite everything the Germans could throw at them, the mission did not turn back. The theory that the bombers will always get through, first promulgated back in the 20s by an Italian air enthusiast, air aviation strategist, what have you, was kind of proved to be true on this day. They did not turn back. They got through their target. They pounded their target to the best of their ability with the technology of the time, and they went home. And then they come back a few weeks later and start doing it all over again. The overall effect of this raid was not what was desired. Effective to a degree in one particular factory, but not to the entire complex of ball bearing factories in Schweinfurt. So, overall effect in the war, not so much. The Germans learned very quickly this was a priority target, and they diffused production of ball bearings throughout the war industry in Germany. Although a lot of it did have to stay in Schweinfurt, they didn't move all the machines. So Schweinfurt got return missions throughout the war. I think it was like a dozen total, up until late 44, to try to knock this industry out, and it was never successful. So the Panacea target theory was shown to be a bit flawed here, but had to be portrayed as a through the PR as a success to keep Allied morale up and say, hey, we're doing a great job, we're pounding German industry here, look at our precision bombing effect. As well as for the 8th Air Force, this had to be promoted as quite a victory over German defenses, and in that sense, it was. And when you add the Mustangs on top of it a few months later, absolutely destroys the Luftwaffe as an effective defense force. Daylight throughout 44, and pretty much by 45, the 8th Air Force and the 15th Air Force in Italy is just roaming the skies at will. 1,000 plane raids with 700 fighter escorts, just romping anywhere they want to, and just laying waste to city after city after city. So there's a lot of stuff in here that I mentioned, the line drawings in the book itself, great, really good stuff. He's very technical with the bomber formations, walking you through how they stacked up and they're covering machine gun fire of each other. And then the combat itself is pretty gory. He's pretty detailed and does not hold back about the effect of cannon shells blowing up inside the cabin of one of these, these B-17s, which, as I said, are just tinder boxes waiting to blow up. So you get 20 millimeter shell exploding in a very confined space. It shreds humans into pulp and blood, and that's about it. It's pretty detailed about that. So nothing held back there. It's just as gory as any infantry combat you may have read. Then there's a curious matter of UFOs. He brings up several crews reported seeing shiny silvery discs floating in the air at 25,000 feet or wherever they're bombing at that day, and coming through the bomber formations and striking several aircraft without apparent effect. And Caidin says this was reported a few other times on other missions later in the war also. And no one could figure out what they were, and no one really could figure it out after the war. I wonder if it was like shell casings from flak bursts that just had no real mass to them, and so wouldn't impact the airplanes severely, or whether they were actually just shell casings from German fighters, maybe coming through the formation, shining in the sunlight. I don't know. It's kind of weird, kind of bizarre, but just a highlight there to take note of. And then he's got a section called, I think it's called 5 Bombers, 10 Minutes or something like that, where he details some of the defensive prowess of some of these bombers, both up to the target and as they're running for their life on the deck through Belgium and Holland and whatnot, managing to stay in the air and shooting down several German fighters each. And then the German fighter defenses is examined pretty closely with all the various aircraft, ME-210s, 410s, MB-109s, MB-110s from the Night Fighter Force, and of course Focke-Wulf 190s, as well as a couple other lower production aircraft that were pressed, kind of like scouting, but kind of pressed into attack that day. And I think they even had an attempt at air coordination with a standoff Focke-Wulf 200, if I remember right, to try to coordinate the strikes as these guys are rolling through the B-17s in squadron-sized formations, using everything they got for ammo. Then they'll land it at their closest airfield, refuel, rearm, and go back up for a second sortie against them as the bombers are turning around and heading for home. So it's very, very good at the explanation of how chaotic this day was, and the pretty tight defense by the Germans as much as they could. But this was kind of driven home that even unescorted and deep in enemy territory, the German fighters could not successfully prevent a bombing raid by a force of heavy bombers. Just couldn't be done. But they also mentioned that what I talked about in the Heinz Kanaka memoir about trying to get above the formation with some MU-19s and dropping bombs into the American bomber formation, trying to get a chain reaction going. This actually happened on the Schweinfurt raid to little or no effect. So that's pretty good stuff. I recommend highly. It's a fast read, but very worthwhile. This is still in print, and for a good reason today. That's Black Thursday by Martin Caidin. And then we're going to go to the Pacific with Pacific Thunder, Thomas Cleaver from 2017 to the tune of about 330 pages total. Probably chop off 50 or 75 for notes, appendix, index, and all that good stuff. This is going to talk about the fast carriers of the Pacific and their initial raids and support of amphibious invasions in late 43, early 44, going all the way through the Philippine invasion and the first use of kamikazes in October 44. So we got that slice in the middle of the war again that kind of gets forgotten about. So after 42 in the Guadalcanal campaign, the IJN was pretty much exhausted for effective carrier forces. They still had several flat tops going, but their air groups really needed to be reformed and retrained. And the cream of the crop was gone, so they had to put the raw recruits in there, and the pilot training program for Japan was really a massive failure. Their high selectivity before the war really crippled them during the war. They just could not get the training done and get these guys up to speed. They wouldn't put them into easy combat areas to get these raw pilots some experience over China. For some reason, it never occurred to them to rotate to an easy theater, get their feet wet, so to speak, and then put them into the Pacific Defense Force. So it was kind of a very poorly thought out training and replacement strategy by Japan, to the point where it's almost like nothing at all was done. But you were talking about primarily from the American point of view, the design of the Essex class carriers, and he goes through the stable of American carrier aircraft in 42, and then the replacement, the second generation, so to speak, the new wave machines that came on to succeed them with better performance, better range, better endurance, better firepower, that took over the Pacific War and pretty much ruined the Japanese Army and Navy Air Forces. Because Japan's innovation for second generation fighters was just about nil. They did have second generation torpedo and dive bomber aircraft, but they both had a lot of bugs, and they needed skilled pilots that they had back in 40 and 41 that were now dead, because these things had higher landing speeds and had tougher handling characteristics. And the new wave of pilots that being trained were just not good, and they were not enough hours in the machines to be good. So it adds up to a recipe for disaster, and it was. I started out with very little expectation. This was going to be anything but a dull retread for me, but a little bit into it, it started to pick up and was a pleasant surprise. And after all this introduction, especially with the commanders of both sides and their faults and foibles and strengths, he then unfortunately backtracks to early 42 and goes through the early carrier raids and the Butch O'Hare saga, fighter pilot on the carriers, and his demise, pioneering night fighting techniques in the Pacific. So that kind of takes a step back. But once he gets back to the Essex class and fast carrier concept, going forward to the early amphibious operations in the Central Pacific in 44, then it picks up speed again, and it's quite good throughout the rest of the book. We're going to talk about Butch O'Hare, as I mentioned, and the Captain from Hell, Miles Browning. This guy was at Midway. He was a air staff officer or executive officer on Hornet, I think. Could be wrong. But he made, or maybe it was Yorktown, but he made that day extremely difficult for the carrier air groups, and that he argued excessively about the strike package to go get Hiryu, I think it was, about 1,000-pound bombs versus 500s. Pilots wanted 500s for better range because Hiryu was kind of out there. They weren't sure her exact location. Figured they had to do some searching. But Miles Browning was like, no, you're going to take 1,000s. We want maximum destruction. And this went on for a while, to the point of ridiculousness where someone had to step in. I don't know if it was Fletcher. Someone had to step in and said, we'll do whatever pilots want. And that's an early indication Miles Browning was a real problem child in the officer corps. And he continued to be so. Admiral King got him out of his executive or his staff position and gave him command of the Hornet just to get him out of the way. So no matter where he goes, he's better if he's not there in the command and control facility aspect. And so the unfortunate crew of the Hornet had to suffer for this guy for a year plus. And he was just abusive to his officers and crew publicly, and sometimes over the 1MC. I read in another book where he berated 2 black stewards publicly over the 1MC for something they did wrong about laying the table or something. So this guy was not a class act at all. And to the point where in Harbor in 44, one night the crew is watching a film on the hangar deck, and some screwball, as a joke, sets off some kind of smoke canister or some kind of thing that makes noise and hisses, and someone thought it was a bomb that was the fuse was running on it. Sets off a panic in the hangar deck, and everyone's trying to get the hell out of there. Several guys ended up in the water, and Miles Browning refused to lower a boat to fish them out. Several men died as a result, and this was finally enough to get him kicked out of command of the Hornet and booted to an obscure post where he could actually finally really do no harm to the Navy. So that's detailed pretty well. And Miles Browning also had a fetish about the Helldiver supposedly only needing 400 feet of space to take off from a carrier, and he made those squadron pilots do that, regardless of what the pilot said. No, this thing's a real beast, and it sucks, and it's sluggish, and it's underpowered, and we need more space. Miles Browning said, no, by the book, 400 feet is what you get, that's it. That's the kind of guy he was. Real pain in the ass. Also, a little detail on the Taiho, which was a replacement for Shakaku class. It only made one of that class, and it was destroyed on its initial operation after taking a torpedo hit by an American submarine. Fumes built up in the carrier and eventually ended up in an explosion. And until now, I've always read that it's been aviation gas fumes, but he says it was fuel oil fumes because of the fuel oil they were using was low-grade stuff, not quite refined. They had to be the carriers, the IJN carrier, had to be based near the oil fields because of the tanker situation back in Japan was pretty bad with American submarines sinking them. So they'd be near the oil fields to make sure they had supply of it. But it was low-grade oil, and it was not refined well. And so it was dirty and caused a lot of other problems, including excessive fumes. And that's why the Taiho blew up. Interesting little detail. I like it. It also mentions Saburo Sakai and his famous fight, as I detailed in another video, in the memoir video, about his return to combat after he lost an eye, and his fight against novice pilots of a new air group in the carrier force, and how he for 30 minutes fought off a whole squadron of Hellcats. So that's confirmed here. Pretty good stuff. And there's a song he mentions. There's some pilot cooked up to the tune of something at the time. I'm going to see if I can find this on the net. It'd be pretty cool to hear if they actually recorded it or something. Titled "I Wanted Wings Until I Got the Goddamn Things," and he prints the entire verse, the entire lyrics in there, and it's pretty funny, pretty good stuff. So I ended up really liking this a lot. Pacific Thunder by Thomas Cleaver, 2017, still in print, recommended highly. So that'll do it today for Grab Bag. And I hope you found one of those two, or both of them, that you might potentially enjoy. Until next time, we'll do it again. I am Bull Halsey. I'm going to go stir up some trouble and defeat Japan. Until next time, happy reading.